All right, guys, we are at the very end and we're going to have a challenge problem. They want us to completely simplify the following trig expression. And now we have two expressions happening here. So if I look at both these expressions, before I add them together, let's just notice how the first expression is written in terms of secant of theta, our reciprocal function, whereas the other expression is already written in terms of cosine. So let's rewrite this first fraction in terms of sines or cosines first and see if that makes some things simplify before we add them together. All right. Let's look only then at this fraction, simplify that out, and then we'll go back and add it to the other fraction. So I'm going to recopy this over here. I have a 1 plus secant of theta over secant of theta minus 1. And right now I encourage you just to pause the video, rewrite it in terms of sine and cosine. Okay, did you get what I got? Let's briefly explain what I did. Now, what I did is I looked at the secant of thetas, and I know secant of theta is just 1 over cosine of theta. So I substituted 1 over cosine of theta for both of those secants of thetas from top to bottom. Now, notice up at the top, we have a 1, and they want us to add it to this fraction, 1 over cosine of theta. In the bottom, the denominator, we have two fractions now. They want us to add 1 or subtract 1 from this fraction, 1 over cosine of theta. What I want to do is just combine the bottom and make it 1 fraction, and combine the top, make it 1 fraction. So I want you to add these two together, top and bottom, and see what you get. Go ahead and pause the video, try to work it out, and see if your work matches my work. Okay, did you get what I got? Notice in the numerator, we have to have that common denominator, which is cosine of theta, which means we have to multiply the 1 by cosine of theta over cosine of theta. And that would give us, in the numerator, cosine of theta plus 1 over cosine of theta. In our denominator, we would have to do the same thing. Our common denominator is cosine of theta, which means we would have to multiply this 1 by cosine of theta over cosine of theta, which means that would give us in our denominator a 1 minus cosine of theta over cosine of theta. Now, guys, look at this. We have that superfraction situation. So I know you're thinking keep, change, flip. Go ahead, pause the video, and I want you to work out keep, change, flip. I know a lot of you aren't comfortable with that, but remember, that's just saying, hey, I'm taking the numerator divided by the denominator. I want to keep the numerator the same. I'm going to change to multiplication, and then I will flip the denominator. Work it out, and let me see what you got. Pause the video. Okay, did you get what I got? Let me explain what I did. So we keep the numerator the same, so that means we're just copying that down. Cosine of theta plus 1 over cosine of theta. We're changing division to multiplication, and then we flip the denominator. And so we would then have cosine of theta over 1 minus cosine of theta. And now let's just multiply across. If we look, though, we can cross divide, and we see that these cosines are going to cancel out, right? So that means when we multiply across, we'll end up with a cosine, cosine of theta plus 1 over 1 minus cosine of theta. Now, let's go ahead and just sub that in. This is the simplified version of our first fraction. So let's sub that in. And so what we really have here is that cosine of theta plus 1 over 1 minus cosine of theta. And then we're going to be adding it to 1 plus cosine of theta over cosine of theta minus 1. Now, if I look at this, let's see if I can rewrite these denominators where they're kind of going the same way, because in order to add these two fractions together, I need a common denominator, and they look pretty darn similar. So I am going to rewrite the denominator here and see what I got. So if I move the cosine in the front, my denominator would change to a negative cosine of theta plus 1. My numerator would be cosine of theta plus 1. And then I got all this stuff over here. 1 plus cosine of theta over cosine of theta minus 1. Now, looking at this denominator, I bet I can get the same denominators or a common denominator if I just multiply this fraction times the negative 1. Let's see what happens. If I multiply top and bottom times the negative 1, I get rid of this negative and I make this positive 1 negative. And then next thing you know, we got a common denominator. Let's do just that. So if I do that, I would end up with the first fraction being a negative cosine of theta minus 1 in the numerator, and it's over a cosine of theta minus 1. And I'd be adding that to the same fraction of 1 plus cosine of theta over cosine of theta minus 1. And guys, we are so happy because we now have a common denominator for these fractions. And let's look what's happening in the numerator. I'm going to get rid of this arrow here. Okay, so look at this numerator, guys. The numerator, I have a negative cosine of theta minus 1 plus a 1 plus cosine of theta. I notice that everything in the numerator would just cancel out. The negative cosine of theta, that would be 0. And a negative 1 plus a 1 is going to be 0. So in my numerator, I would have a 0 over this denominator, cosine of theta minus 1. And that would just mean that all of this stuff is just a 0, because 0 divided by anything is going to be 0. So, hey guys, this expression was just a fancy way to write 0. All right, you're going to move on and you are going to try working out problems by yourself. I know it is a lot. You're going to be pulling a lot of your past algebra and bringing that back to your memory. And you're going to try to work out problems by yourself on your trig assignment, Intro to Trig Identities assignment number 2. Good luck, guys.